Hello and welcome back to my channel. It is now Wednesday, February 4th. I am still gone, but I'm going to walk you through today's lesson on writing annotations for research sources. Hopefully you received today's new colorful paper handout. You're going to be filling that in with some notes as we go through things today. If I'm going too fast or too slow, feel free to pause the video or speed it up a little bit depending on what you need. I do recommend also having AirPods in so you're not hearing echoes of my voice as everyone else is working. So AirPods in, notes ready, let's go. But first, actually, before we start notes, what you're going to need to do is have all of your MLA citations added onto your Google Doc today to be able to help with the next step. So let's take a moment now. You should have database sources with your MLA citations. Those we are now going to add to your Google Doc for a total of 5 sources. So what that might look like, here I am on a database source card, and hopefully by now you've got all this stuff filled in, but we're worried about the MLA citation. So I'm going to copy my MLA citation, and then if you go to your Google Doc, where you probably have some of the sources started already. If you're missing some of your other ones, definitely go back and add them today. This last one I'm adding begins with a W for the author's name, so it'll actually be my last one right here. I just pasted it in. Looks pretty good, except looks like it needs double spacing. Yours will be a little bit different how you do that, but I just made sure mine was double spaced. You would be looking for the A up in the toolbar, up in this corner on your iPad, but now mine's double spaced. Do that for both of your sources. Pause the video if you need. But looking at my sample one now, I've got my research question at the top, my claim statement, and then my 5 sources in alphabetical order are now here. And once you've done that, come back to the video and move on for notes. Alright, so if you're ready for notes, get your pencil ready. Let's fill in some things about writing annotations. This is different than the highlighting and annotating we've done in our books in the past, so don't worry, it's not quite like that. This is to go along with our annotated bibliography project. That Google Doc that you were just adding to, that is the final piece of the project for this unit. And the last part is to add what we call annotations, really explanations. For each source, you're going to be writing an annotation of 5 to 8 sentences that explain the source's content, purpose, and how it helps answer your research question. So you can be filling in the underlined parts on your blanks. This is just information about what you're doing next. You may write these annotations either in the form of bullet points, which I'll show you what that looks like, or you can choose to do it in one paragraph. But in either case, these are just kind of little write-ups about what you learned from each source, and they're going to include a summary of the source's main points, why the source passes the CRAAP test, which is on your note cards, how the source helps answer your research question, and then if the source included any counterclaims to whatever your solution was. So this is an example of what one of these annotations might look like. We'll get into the specifics, but here's that source I just copied over, and my annotation here includes in bullet point 1, 2, 3, 4 bullet points those requirements. So it would look something like this on your Google Doc page, but doing it for each source, which you'll do over the next couple of days. So here are the specifics. Continue filling in your notes. The first part of that annotation is going to be the summary. So what you're going to get graded on is, for this part, do you write down the main idea of the text? Is it well explained in your own words? And is the summary written in formal academic language? So this is the part really where just underneath your source, you're explaining what was this about? What was the author's point? And some tips. Obviously, you can refer back to the example one. I'll show that again later. But the tips for writing this part of the annotation summary would be to look back at where you gave the main idea of the article on your source cards. So if you're talking about web source 1, look back at that main idea. Well, what did you say about it? Use that information now in a little bit more of a write-up form on the Google Doc. Also, focus on the parts of the article that were most connected to your research topic. If there were some parts that weren't super relevant, focus more on what was important to your topic. And make sure you're writing these in the third person perspective. So you won't be saying like, I read this, or we think that this is the solution. Instead, you want to focus more on the article itself. Say things like, the author says this is the solution, or the source states that 50% of people, blah, blah, blah. Look at it a little more objectively in third person. The second part of the annotation is when you have to write about how it passed the CRAAP test, how each source passed the CRAAP test. So for this part, your writing will get graded on, do you clearly explain the author's purpose of writing the source? And do you clearly explain why the source is credible? In other words, why it passes the CRAAP test. So for this part of the writing, it would be very helpful to look back at the actual CRAAP test section of your source cards and see, like, well, did it pass every category? Was there one that I was kind of iffy about? Your main goal with this part of the annotation is help explain how you knew the source was valid to use. And you don't need to address all the categories of CRAAP in every annotation that you write. Maybe there's just a few categories to talk about for each one. Maybe the author of one source was really interesting to you because, oh, this guy was a doctor. Like, that's how I knew this source was so good. Or, wow, this article just came out a month ago, so I know that it is definitely current and up to date. Maybe just whatever categories are the most standout for that particular source. Writing the third part of the annotation. This is where you're going to explain how each source helped you answer your research question. So what you'll get graded on for this part is, do you thoughtfully explain how the source helps to answer your research question in some way? And do you cover how the source explains some of the issue or the possible solution of your topic? So we know that each source can't, fully answer your research question or give you every bit of information. So you're just kind of touching on, well, how did this give me part of my answer or give me part of my understanding about what needs to happen for this issue? And since this is a little more specific, what you can do to help write this part is look back at the specific quotes from your digital note cards. And this will help you consider how that source helped you answer the research question in a specific way. You do not need to include the quote in your annotation. You've already done that on the note cards, but this is more of you just kind of referring back and maybe mentioning whatever point was in the quote. You could also reuse some of the main words from your research question or your claim as you write this part. What that means is, like, if you asked about in your research question, the effects of school starting later, well, effects and school start later are very key things to probably mention as you explain. Oh, this source really helped show me the effects of school starting later. Like, tie it back. You want everything to be related. The final part of An annotation for each source will be the counterclaims and rebuttal part. So when you write this bullet point, you are getting graded on, does one of your sources include a counterclaim or an opposing viewpoint against your solution? Is the counterclaim clearly explained? Can you defend your viewpoint, which means give a rebuttal in this case? And I know counterclaims were kind of tough, so remember, this was just your orange note cards, the source where you looked for maybe someone was giving a different perspective or bringing up a challenge with the solution you're proposing, and that was okay. There's going to be counterclaims and different opinions. This is kind of just your chance, though, to point out, hey, a counterclaim, another viewpoint exists about this situation. But your rebuttal is kind of your time when you say, like, nope, I still have a good solution. This counterclaim point isn't super strong. Some tips for that are obviously to look back at your orange cards from the counterclaim source, see what you said about it there. And when you go to actually explain the counterclaim in this annotation note, you could also include why your solution, your argument, is stronger than whatever this counterclaim says. Maybe you can point out if the counterclaim is kind of a weak point, or they're missing some important context. Maybe there's just kind of some assumptions being made, or it's not really focused on your main problem. Anything that shows, yeah, I found a counterclaim, but it's really not that big of, an opponent to what I'm actually saying. So this is an example, now that we've gone through all the points of an annotation, an example of what that annotation might look like if you want to do it as a paragraph. So this is the same source I had before, and I just put a bullet point underneath that source entry and wrote annotation, and then gave this paragraph where I talked about all 4 of those required things, just one after another. And it's a little bit of a longer paragraph because I had a lot to say about this one. But compared this format to this one where it's in bullet points, it's actually the exact same information. I gave a summary of the article, talked about how it passed the CRAAP test, how it answered my example research question, and talked about some of the counterclaims that showed up in it, and also my rebuttal. So again, we'll compare right here. Here are the 4 things that have to be included in each annotation. This paragraph just had them all in one bullet point form. You can pause and look at these or take screenshots if you want examples to compare. Again, here's the paragraph one and the bullet point one. I'm going to read through this one and explain it a little bit if you want to stick around and hear my explanation. Otherwise, you can scroll ahead. But in this one, so for my summary part, I said this article explains how studying poetry can help students become better thinkers and be aware of their feelings. The author talks about how teachers can mix in small poetry lessons focused on how poetry makes the reader feel as they give other lessons. So that part is literally just what was this article saying? What was the point the author was getting across? CRAAP test. This source passed 4 out of 5 CRAAP test categories. It is from 2008, so it's not very current. However, it was very relevant to the topic of teaching poetry in classrooms, and the information seemed highly accurate since it was written by a high school English teacher. So in this part, I point out something that wasn't super great about my CRAAP test, but all the other important things, like it is on topic, it is about teaching poetry. That was my other example topic I was using here. And the authority, the author, I mentioned that it was written by a high school English teacher, which makes this person very knowledgeable about whatever I'm writing about. For this part, answers research question. This source answers the research question by providing a piece of the solution. The author suggests that once students see how poetry can make them feel so many emotions, they will be interested in learning about it more. So my problem in this example project was that students don't study enough poetry. So here I'm showing, this source, someone is telling us, hey, if they focus on, how poetry makes the students feel, they will like it. That can help solve the problem. That goes with my research question. I'm solving this problem of not enough poetry in classrooms in some way. And the last part, counterclaims and rebuttal. The author admitted that it can be expensive to buy additional poetry resources and books that might be needed. This would make adding in poetry lessons difficult. However, the author also points out these books can be used again and again, so paying for one classroom set of books and reusing them can make it worthwhile to make poetry a bigger part of studies. So in this part, it's not like my entire source was a counterclaim. There was just one part I noticed where she brought up something that could be a counterclaim, the fact that the new poetry books are expensive, which the money factor shows up in a lot of issues that we are researching. So I point out that, yep, she says this might make it difficult, but she also kind of points out, this isn't a big concern because we can just use the books again and again and, keep them in the classroom and it won't be a big deal. So that is kind of the rebuttal there. Yes, there is a counterclaim against this, but don't worry, the solution is still worth it. So that was an example, kind of a breakdown of making these annotations. So now it's kind of your time to choose. Do you want your annotations, because you're doing one for each source, do you want it to be more of this bullet point style? Or do you want it to be more of a paragraph? You're writing the same stuff, just depends what works better for your brain. But make that choice now. And then I want you to go on to your Google Doc and kind of add in the points of where you're going to put these annotations. So what that might look like, here I'm on my Works Cited page. If you choose to do the paragraph option, just underneath each of your sources, you're just going to put a spot that says annotation. And under the next one, annotation, so that you're ready to add in that paragraph. So my third one, annotation. So yours would be something like this if you're choosing to do the paragraph format. But if you would instead like to do the bullet point, kind of break it down piece by piece what you need to fill in, then you're going to have a couple bullet points. So the categories, you would need to include these for each one. You need a spot for summary. You need a spot to describe the CRAAP test, how it passed the CRAAP test each time. Am I missing one of them? Oh, answers your research question. That's the next one. So the next one can be answers research question. And the last point will be counterclaim and rebuttal. This part also, you may not have this in every source. So some of them you might just kind of be able to say, no, there were not any counterclaims. This really supported my solution. But if you're doing the bullet points, you'll want to do, I'm just copying and pasting so I don't miss any for all 5 of my sources. So I'm saving a spot under each of my citations to go back and add those written parts. So if you need to pause right now and do that, go ahead and set up your own Google Doc. Again, here's what it'll look like under each source if you're doing the bullet points. If you're choosing to do paragraphs, you can just put annotation. All right, hopefully you paused, fixed up your Google Doc, did whatever formatting you needed. Here is what you have to do for the rest of class, and you're welcome to obviously go back through this video, look at just certain timestamps or chapters or whatever. But your job for the rest of class today, and before next class if you need, is to use today's notes that you filled in and those examples I went through to write annotations for 2 of your sources. So 2 out of 5 of them you're working on today. And then you're going to submit screenshots of those 2 annotations. There's a spot on Blackbaud to turn that in. You're going to do that before next class. So again, that means in the end, you're going to do something like this for one source, and then do another write-up like that for a second source. You will get to the 3rd, 4th, and 5th ones next time, next class. But that's really what you're working on today. Use your resources. If you made it to this part of the video, congratulations, you're awesome. Comment what percentage your iPad battery's at in the YouTube comments, and maybe I'll give you a bonus point or something. But yes, thanks for listening. Make sure to like and subscribe for more incredible research content, and I'll see you soon.